Welcome, everyone. It's so exciting to see you all. It's so exciting to be back in person. I forgot my clicker, one thing. Okay, I'm Carolyn Wang Kong. I'm the President and Executive Director of Asian Pacific Fund. Thank you so much for being here. This day has been a labor of love. I will just tell you, it has been a labor of love. But we're so excited that you are spending the day with us and excited for the day. We have a lot to talk about today. We have a lot of great conversations that we're going to be having. And I am going to just jump in because we got so much to do. All right, that's me. I'm right there. Okay, so all of you have agendas in front of you, and you also have a QR code that you can use if you want more information on our speakers and our sponsors and our program today. And you can also use this too, so feel free to use that. First of all, let me just ask, sorry, I kind of jumped right into things, but how is everyone doing? I just, I'm like firing. I'm like, okay, we need to get through these things. But thank you. Good. Thank you. I'm excited for the excitement in the room. I wanted to take a second to thank our sponsors. I know, sponsors sponsor convenings all the time. But I think for us, what's particularly meaningful for me about this group of sponsors, many of you are in the room, is that we didn't just approach you and say, we want to do another summit, right? We actually said we want to talk about AAPIs and the racial justice movement. That's different. These are the folks who heard our pitch, who heard what we wanted to do today and said yes. And so I just want to really thank the Wallace Culture Foundation. They have supported the fund for decades now. Blue Shield of California, CSA, AAA, Levi Strauss, Fatima's here, Caroline is here also. We have the James Irvine Foundation, Kaiser Permanente, Silicon Valley Community Foundation, I saw Ann, Sugar Bowl US Bank, and then we also have a few folks who don't necessarily do sponsorships, but again, they saw our agenda, really believed in it. Akonadi is here also. Bank of America and Comcast as well. So thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, so today's a very special day for us at the fund because today's summit is not your typical summit. We are choosing to focus it on an important topic in our community. We do feel like that's an important role for the Community Foundation Asian Pacific Fund to play. And we're kind of coming out in terms of showing up in different ways. And we would love all of your help to tell that story of what you're experiencing today, what you're hearing today. So, Chase Richardson has leveled up our social game. If y'all have been following the past month or so, it's really, really exciting to just tell more of the story of what the fund does, what our affiliates do, what issues we care about, right? So please post away. These are our handles. Use the hashtag. There are actually a number of folks who could not make it into this room, either because of capacity limits or scheduling conflicts. And so to the extent that we can bring the story to them too, would be lovely. Okay, housekeeping. Housekeeping is something I'm also supposed to talk about. So right outside of the auditorium doors are restrooms. There's a Wi-Fi code on your program if you need to access Wi-Fi for any reason. And then I already told you about the programs, and the program code is there too. Coffee and tea will be free-flowing, so help yourself, take care of whatever needs you might have. We're all still kind of getting back into the whole convening thing, so take care of your needs accordingly. Okay. Oh, all right. I'm not going to reveal that just yet. Okay, so just a little bit of context, right? So why are we spending a whole day talking about racial justice? Everyone's talking about racial justice. But what's different about today is, when have we had the chance to actually have some conversations within the Asian American and Pacific Islander community specifically, right? So today is supposed to be that space for us, and we have some amazing allies in the room as well. Today is going to be about reflecting on the past few years, right? We've had this pandemic that's, everyone says, it's revealed all these systemic inequities, right? We've had racial reckoning, which we have not solved and are still very much going through as a nation, as a community. And then, of course, we've had anti-Asian hate impacting our own communities, right? Seeing our elders getting hurt. As an Asian American woman, I had vowed at one point never to get on BART again. I ride BART regularly now. But it's a feeling of unsafety, right? So those things in sequence have a compounding impact on all of us, right? A good friend of mine, Sukri, who, when I was taking this job, she said, you have to lead from a scar, you can't lead from a wound. Because I told her I was angry, right? She said, you have to lead from a scar, because scars are places of strength and wounds are places of hurt, and you can't lead from a place of hurt and anger. A silver lining for the past few years is that we have had so many new Asian American, Pacific Islander oriented organizations pop up, right, over the past few years, new nonprofits, new coalitions. Some of you are here in this room. And so the question I have for us is, in this moment, it's so exciting, right, to think about new organizations coming on the scene. Are we healing together, right, as Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders and AAPIs, right? Because there's so much diversity within our own cultural and ethnic group. There are folks in this room who have been at this for decades. And they know that if you're trying to drive systems change, if you're trying to drive sustainable change, there's no way to do it except for together, right? So how are we actually building together towards the vision that we want? Now I'm going to show the slide. Just take this in. Some of you got this in an email from me a few weeks ago. The Merc came out with an article, the Mercury News came out with an article a couple weeks ago, and I'll move in case folks over there can't see, that said the Bay Area is getting older and more Asian. They didn't say that, but that's my paraphrasing. It was basically those two things. But they included this chart, amongst others, and you can actually pull this data by county. But what this chart says is that we're the green, y'all. 33.1% of the Bay Area population identifies as Asian alone. That's incredible. That's 1 in 3 people in the Bay Area who identify as Asian. We got numbers, y'all. That's huge, right? That's huge. And so when we look at that, this actually, in context with the other demographics that you see, this is why we need to have the conversation today around where we fit in the racial justice movement and what role we should be playing. This is why we need to have the conversation today. And I will say that as Asian Pacific Fund, right, we're the only community foundation that is dedicated to strengthening the Asian American and Pacific Islander community here in the Bay Area. And so when we look at that, that's kind of a game changer. I mean, when APF was started, and Gail Kong is here, our founding executive director, when APF was started 30 years ago, the Bay Area was 15% Asian Americans, more than double now, right? Math is not my forte, but 33.1% today. And so for a leader like me, it begs the question of what should the role of APF be when we reside in a region where those are the numbers, right? Because what that means is, as a community foundation and as a community, when we have the highest numbers like that, we need to be leading. We need to be leading in conversations. We need to be leading in identifying what the issues are in our community, and we need to be leading in identifying the solutions that are for not just our community, but the entire Bay Area. Because when you've got an issue that impacts 1 in 3 members, any issue that's impacting the AAPI community is a Bay Area issue, right? But at the same time, what I'll say is, it's not all crazy rich Asians out there, right? It's definitely not. It's definitely not. And in my 7 months in the role here at Asian Pacific Fund, because of our close connections with our affiliates, many of whom are in this room, We know that there are significant issues facing our community. Yes, mental health. Everyone talks about mental health, right? You heard me walk through the past 3 years. It's been a rough few years. But if you think back to the root causes of what drives poor mental health, it's things like financial instability, right? It's things like housing insecurity, food insecurity. If you don't have your basic needs met, right, your mental health gets compromised. We did a recent survey of our affiliates because Asian Pacific Fund is trying to figure out what we should focus in on in service of our community. What are the root causes and systems changes we should be focusing in on? What do you think is the number one issue that people said we should focus in on? Just shout it out. What's that? Safety. Safety? Housing? Finances. Economic security. Economic security, far and away the number one issue. That flies directly in the face of any sort of crazy rich Asians narrative you put out there, right? We've seen basic needs go up, housing insecurity go up. Economic security is the number one issue on the minds of our affiliates. So we're going to be talking about a lot of different things today. We're going to be talking about the intersection of those issues with racial justice. You're going to be hearing about that in our panel. I'm borrowing a page out of Karthik Ramakrishnan, who is going to be, is Karthik here yet? Not yet, he's probably on a plane. He's going to be speaking, hopefully he gets here in time. And he has this framework called DNA, data, narrative, and action, right? So in order to drive change, you need not just data, not just narrative, and action. You need it all grouped together. So today's agenda has actually been designed in that way. You're going to be hearing from Karthik around the latest data around the social needs that our communities are facing. We have a fireside chat with Helen Zia and Viet Thanh Nguyen, moderated by Stephen Gong later this afternoon, that will be all about narrative. And not just about what our current narratives, but what should our story be as an AAPI community, right? And then we have a couple of our affiliates who are gonna be presenting with their partners, a couple of our affiliates who've been working cross-racially to show us what action looks like. And they're gonna be talking about the good, bad, the surprising, all of the above, right? So we have some models for how we wanna collaborate. Because of schedule limitations, the order is more like D-A-N, so Karthik says that I've turned it into Dan instead of DNA. But that's the gist. The last thing I will just say is that it's going to be kind of sticky today. It might be a little heavy in terms of the topics that we talk about. And I encourage you to stick with it. I encourage you to keep an open mind and listen. You're probably going to hear things that might trigger you. You'll probably hear things that you might disagree with. But this is a family conversation. This is where we need to stick with it. And my goal for everyone is that that we offer you a thought-provoking day, that maybe you get a little bit more curious and maybe shift some of your thinking as well. But this is the start. This is the start of a series of conversations that we need to have. So thank you for being here. So we're gonna jump right in and go big. Like, look at all these chairs. We're gonna go big. And I'm gonna invite our first panel up to the stage. We are going to start with some anchoring. And the word anchor is a really deliberate one because anchoring to where we've been reminds us of who we come from, right? And it reminds us that we come from quite a lot. So we have 6 ladies who will be coming up to the stage. I'll take it to right here. And I will introduce them, and then we're going to have a conversation. Where do I sit? Wherever you want. Perfect. Yes.
Adjustment here.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
We have our Janet Jackson headsets, just kind of. Don't expect any dancing, at least not from me. But okay, all right. Well, thank you everyone for being here. I'm going to go ahead and just do some quick introductions so that you know who is gracing this stage. So to my right, and I guess you're not right, is Leafa Taumoepeau, who is the co-founder of Taulama for Tongans. Leafa has been in this work for decades, and leadership in service is really a way of life for her. So we are honored to have her. I'm not going to do the full bios because you guys can look in the online for that information. Next is Estella Owoimaha-Church. Estella Owoimaha-Church. So Estella is the executive director of Empowering Pacific Islander Communities, or APEC. And it's interesting because Estella stepped into this role after being a teacher for 20 years. Nikki Dinh, right in the middle there. Nikki is the co-executive director of Leadership Learning Community, which is an organization that's really dedicated to supporting BIPOC leaders. You should ask her about something called Forest School for her kids. And then Pam Tau Lee. So I have to read some of this because some of our folks are very esteemed and have very long careers. So yeah, I'm gonna do it, Pam. Okay. So Pam is fourth generation elder who's from San Francisco. She's a co-founder of the Chinese Progressive Association, Asian Pacific Environmental Network, the Just Transition Alliance, and is chair of the International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines. And she's contributed to a landmark document called the 17 Principles of Environmental Justice. And then next to her is Vivian Huang, Vivian is the co-director of Asian Pacific Environmental Network. She's actually been with APEN for more than a decade and has been leading their organizing and leadership development work and recently stepped into the co-director role. Ask her about cake and ice cream.
Ooh, yes.
If they put it in their bio, I'm going to read it, right? Yes. Okay, and then the last person is Peggy Saika. So I have to read this one as well. Peggy was the most recently the interim executive director of Common Counsel Foundation. She also has been in this space for more than 4 decades. She is, executive director of Asian Law Caucus, has been founding executive director of Asian Pacific Environmental Network, APEN, co-founder of Asian Women's Shelter, APIs for Choice, National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum, and the New York Committee to Free Chol Soo Lee. Mm-hmm. So lots of experience up on this stage, lots and lots of experience up on the stage. And what we're going to do is have a conversation amongst our 6 panelists here. And I'm going to start with Peggy and Leafa and Pam, and ask them to start us off with, answering this question of you all have been in this space and you all have been activists for decades and working in community for decades. And I'm curious how you've thought about racial equity in your work or racial justice in your work, and whether your thinking about it has changed over the years. So Leafa, I'm just going to start with you.
Thank you. And thank you very much for the opportunity. This was a topic that was a bit of a challenge for me because I have to begin from my beginnings. I am Tongan, I'm from the South Pacific. I was educated in Tonga and in New Zealand and then found my way here. But this issue was not an issue I grew up with, because I grew up in my own country, not subjected to any foreign country. And I was the major group of people that inhabited my country. So it took me a while when I came here to know that there is such a thing that is in existence. Because it's hidden. And for someone who has no experience of this, it's pretty hard to know. And you can be there face to face with it and have no idea that that was prejudice. But we learn. And it's a painful lesson, but we do learn. And I've been learning ever since It makes me cry, it makes me sad, makes me very angry, and it propels me forward, but it also stops me from going places. Because I always have this fear that I am face to face with this thing that's called prejudice, and I wouldn't know how to deal with it. And I think that's, unless you want me to continue.
No. I think that's great. I mean, this is part of setting our stage, right? About how we think about it. Pam.
Sure. I see that young lady has this little sign that says "Time's up." So I don't know whether it applies because I can go.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I got you. Okay. Emily is helping us keep us honest. Yeah.
So my name is Pam Tau Lee, and my origins are, I'm fourth generation out of San Francisco, Chinatown. I lived with my grandmother in the single-room occupancy. I and my father in our family had tuberculosis. There was mental illness. My grandfather was an addict. And so, it's just your Chinatown story. And so I went to college, and it was at college that the Black Power movement and ethnic studies, the fight for ethnic studies, surfaced in 1969. And the call there for me was to be able to return to community, to serve the people, to uplift the voices there. And so I responded to that. How it's different for me today is that from that moment, I was really back to community. I was on Kearney Street. I was in the international hotel struggle. And so it was really focused on space and the preservation and protection of our communities. But how it's changed for me over time is, in terms of what you talked about earlier, is really widening that arc, that circle, to really bring together our communities and understanding each other's diaspora, and be able to give voice. I was with Peggy in Washington, D.C. in 1990, and the two of us were really, I guess, an affirmation of the importance of us to be able to speak for ourselves and act for ourselves and do it with genuine solidarity. So for me, those are the same, but what I feel is something more of a challenge today is this myths, model minority myths, that we really need to be able to stand up and reject and offer a vision. As Grace Lee Boggs says, she said it to me, "Don't be a victim." She says it like that. And, have a vision for a better world possible. And so for me, how that has reaffirmed is grow that circle, understand each other. We were part of a creation of a document called Principles of Working Together, meaning sharing resources and supporting each other through funding and things. So that is how, for me, it's changed. Yeah. Oh, she didn't raise her sign.
Peggy, how about you?
Thank you. So first of all, it's so great to reconnect with so many of you out there, and then to follow Pam Tau Lee, I love that. So the joke, can I start with a joke?
Yes.
So the joke about Pam Tau Lee and myself being involved early on in the environmental justice movement, they could never tell us apart, and we were probably the only two Asian American women at that time, the same age and all that kind of stuff. And so they'd I don't know how many times, they'd look at me and call me Pam, or look at Pam and call her Peggy. But this one story is I was flying to Washington, D.C., and on this flight with this medical doctor in the Bay Area that Pam knew really, really well. And so we just started talking, and all the way across the country we were talking because we're both going to Research Triangle Park, Anyway, so, but when we get on that, get off, and all of a sudden she looks at me, she goes, "You're not Pam Tau Lee." Oh my gosh. And I'm like, "No, I'm not. I'm Peggy. It's so nice to meet you." But anyway, that was the source of a lot of, but it's more indicative when we talk about racial justice
Right,
and all
it
of that
is,
of the times, and it's it happened across so many sectors and all of that. But I really want to lift up how I think you started this in the beginning, talking about racial equity, racial justice. We cannot do that without being in solidarity with other communities of color, without looking at other issues, and without looking at economic justice. And so for me, as a third generation and Japanese American, we tell our stories about our families being incarcerated, during the war. But that, to me, is like our legacy. But then at the end of the day, it's not what we look like, it's what we stand for, right? And so that really translates to me over the generations. And yes, we're elders now. What the hell, right? When did this happen? We're like called movement elders. I own that space now. I really do. Look at this, But I own it. But and still, the fight continues. And for me, the rallying cry is that what you're really leading is a discussion around how, as Yuri told us, we can't ever forget that we belong to each other. And I think that that's really to me, the framework and the driving force of doing solidarity work.
Yeah. Yeah.
What was that?
Someone called me a yelder the other day, which I was like, I'll take that.
Yeah, take it while you can, for real.
I think it's so helpful to just hear kind of your thinking about this topic, even because how we came up, whether it was, and Pam, you mentioned kind of your initial getting into this was to respond to community and protect, right? And Leafa, I think also just this idea of this concept of prejudice being something you didn't realize because you don't experience it in your home countries, but here, and I know we've talked about this too, of just it shows up in so many different ways in terms of how you're seen, how you're treated, and how you're funded as well. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And Peggy, I think, yes, absolutely this message around solidarity, and what it's making me think of too, your story is also like there's more of us now too. So.
Yeah.
There's more of us now in this space. And so we have Vivian and Nikki and Estella, who've all very courageously stepped into leadership over this past 3 years into leading their organizations. And I wanted to ask you three, it's been a heck of a time to step into leadership. Really a pressure cooker, and you're working on topics that are at the intersection of what Peggy mentioned, racial justice, economic justice, environmental, it's all tied together. So I'm curious, how are you thinking about racial justice as a root cause issue that's linked to these other issues? And how do we need to actually align and work in solidarity with others to achieve racial justice? Who wants to go first? Vivian, I'm looking at you.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So I think in thinking about for today, I was really reflecting on like a quote that I read somewhere where it talked about how, you find your way forward by knowing every moment of how you got there. And I just really feel that in this moment, like being, next to Pam and Peggy, who've been part of the environmental justice movement for so long. And I feel like it really is an offering too about, as we continue to think about how, this work and struggle around racial justice has a very long history and a very long arc, and how do we really like continue that advance, in along that lineage, right, and really honor kind of that legacy and lineage that we're building upon. So, as both Pam and Peggy have mentioned, there was a National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit. And APEN as an organization actually was kind of planted as a seed of idea in that summit, and then from that summit actually became an organization. And I think because of that, I think our organization has always been very deeply rooted in thinking about racial justice. When you have a conversation about environmental justice, race is always very much at the central. When decisions are made about, where to put, a power plant, where to put a refinery, where to put, a toxic waste dump, race is very much a driver, and very much part of how those decisions get made. And so, so I think at APEN, because of that history and that kind of how we were founded, I think we've always remained very much recognizing the importance of how to be very rooted in racial justice as a critical part of our work. And so, we have roots in organizing the Laotian refugee and youth community in Richmond, also with Chinese immigrants in Oakland, Chinatown. And then we actually just launched this year an organizing project in the South Bay region of Los Angeles. And I think with all those areas, though, I think we're always very much cognizant of connecting to people, to the community history, the community place, but also with our own members' histories and connections as part of a diaspora, from the Asian homelands. And so, so I think that grounding and kind of like who we are is so important, that allows us to be able to build the kind of solidarity that we need to do with other communities of color, and to really stand for racial justice, right? And it's not about who we are, as Peggy mentioned. I think what's happening with climate right now, and all the crisis that we're really experiencing, it just shows like our current systems aren't sustainable. Like we are living in an extractive economy that is polluting our air, that is extracting from our land, and it's not healthy for the planet, it's not healthy for us, it's actually not sustainable. And we know that a transition is happening. Transition is inevitable, right? But justice is not. And that's where I think it's so important that when we think about these crises, that we're actually standing in really solid solidarity with other communities who are also going to be impacted. Around an issue like climate justice, it's like we're all going to be impacted in some ways, but I want to lift up that certain communities are going to be more impacted, right? And these are the communities that are have faced and borne the impacts, of white supremacy, that are going to be impacted first and are going to be impacted worst, from the climate crisis. One thing that, as part of, I think, really making these connections around climate justice with racial and economic justice is, I think, also wanting to also value, I think, the wisdom that our communities actually hold, right? But maybe like have lost or have been disconnected from over the years. And so knowing that like our power comes from our lived experiences, but that we also have wisdom, from our traditions and our culture that really show us the way and really teach us about interdependence, teach us about mutuality, teach us about, the power of the collective, right? And actually being organized as a collective. And so I think in terms of like how we're thinking about racial justice, it's really tied up and caught up in how we're actually waging these campaigns to really contest, the extractive economy and really fight against the impacts that our communities are seeing. And so, one story I was going to share was just about some of our organizing in Richmond, where I think both Pam and Peggy were part of some of the initial, but just, this principle around how, those impacted should lead and that we speak for ourselves, right? And how do we always center kind of those principles as part of our work, right? And so I think that when APEN was first starting to organize in Richmond, one of the first campaigns that the Laotian community really lifted up was fighting for a multilingual warning system in the aftermath of a refinery explosion. So the idea was that, the refinery had exploded. People were experiencing huge health impacts. They knew nothing about what had happened. There was no communication. There was no information, right? And so that was one of the early campaigns where our communities really got to center, like, hey, this is our lived experience, and it's not right, and we're going to fight for what we think is the solution for our community, right? And then to say that, over time, it's like it wasn't enough to just be warned about when these explosions and polluting events happen, right? But recognizing like, oh, we actually need to stop the refinery from polluting at all and like really putting in safeguards. And so then there were further campaigns, around trying to stop the refinery from expanding, for example. And, and with all these efforts, we couldn't do it alone. I mean, it's like in Richmond, the Laotian community is a very important community, part of the community, and there's just so many other groups that are also similarly impacted by the health and air quality impacts, right? And so I think that over time, it's become more clear for folks that, hey, it's not just about a warning system. It's actually not just about limiting, how much the refinery can pollute, but it's actually about how do we actually transition away from having a refinery altogether? Right? And so when as a community, when we feel into that power and agency and that vision of what is possible, we can actually come up with bold solutions, like actually thinking about, hey, we need to decommission the refinery. We need to actually talk about a just transition of the refinery, and we're developing the vision for what that looks like when that refinery is gone. How do we want to use the land? How do we want to use that space by the water? What are the things that we want to create for our communities that we know that we need? And so I think because we've been able to center these ideas around those most impacted should lead, and that we speak for ourselves, and standing in solidarity with communities across these intersectional issues, that's where I think our power is, and how we're going to win, continue to win ahead.
So we did some prep. So you'll see they're already kind of pulling threads, right, from each other, which I think is really important as we think about, back to Pam's point around don't be a victim, how do you set a vision, right? And thank you, Vivian, for bringing out, language access is another big issue. Language access is a form of power. When you don't have language access, someone has taken that power from you, right? So how do you build towards that? Nikki, how about you?
I'll offer, at Leadership Learning Community, we run, fund, study, and practice leadership. And we are a Black and refugee, I'm a Southeast Asian refugee. And we work with a lot of BIPOC leaders in the nonprofit and social goods sector. And one of the things we think about when we think about leadership is we think about network leadership, solidarity, and leadership, but we also think about liberatory leadership. And I just wanted to layer in another focal point, we have to have race equity, we have to have race justice, but we also can look at collective liberation. And I bring this in because so many of the leaders that we've worked with over the years, especially after this pandemic or during the pandemic, were exhausted. I don't know how many of you feel that. Just depressed, exhausted, and there wasn't a lot of joy left in our lives because the circumstances that we were seeing unravel during this pandemic was clear to us. These systems were not going to serve us. We were not going to get to justice even after all that community showing that we wanted justice, we wanted a racial reckoning. And so what the focal point, the invitation of liberatory leadership or collective liberation shares is that while you're doing this work, enjoy it. Know that you're on the right side of history. Bring back the love, the healing, the community feel that our families represent and have seated with us. Bring that back into this work because we really do deserve to have fully flourishing lives while we are in this fight. And this is not, it might not be a destination for us. It might be a journey that we continuously do over generations. So I offer that as one other layer to this conversation today so that we can also laugh together, enjoy, and honor some of the great work that has happened over years and that there is progress. It just is a longer arc.
I think that's especially true for, I'll just say as someone new working in this space, in the AAPI space, right, and kind of feeling everything. One thing I worried about taking this job was like everything would feel personal. And it's true. So I think that's helpful advice. Estella, how about you?
Yeah, thank you, Salafalava, and thank you for the opportunity as an aspiring radical elder. It is a blessing to be on the stage with you all. So I have a lot of thoughts. I had my notes, and then listening to everyone, I got more notes. But listening to Leafa, I was thinking I dream often about what that childhood would have looked like. I am Samoan, Nigerian, born and raised on Tongva lands, for now known as South Central Los Angeles. That is the Aina that raised me. And my mother is from Satufia, Savai'i, Samoa. My father is from Calabar, Nigeria. I'm the daughter of immigrants, first generation. First gen to do a lot in my family. And served as an educator and labor union organizer for nearly 2 decades. And so working with high schoolers has given me a very precious lens to view the world, and a different way actually of raising my daughter, who is also Black Pacifica. And I want to start by naming, growing up, there weren't many places I felt safe as a Black Pacifica woman. And I know, to your point, Nikki, that this is going to be a very long voyage, that I'll never actually reach the shoreline, right? Like, and I hope that at least my daughter's children, grandchildren, know something very different, that as they're raising their children, they get to raise their kids through an absolute lens of liberation that is not riddled with anti-Blackness. Because so much of what we talk about talks around naming and calling out anti-Blackness. It runs deep through API communities, and is not of our making. So as an educator, and my bias is definitely towards the classroom, but I think one of the biggest solutions that has to be on the table is ethnic studies, ethnic studies for all. I didn't have the language to talk about my experiences, share my stories, navigate my journey until Black feminist gave me the language. And as an undergraduate Africana Studies major, theater double major at Cal State Northridge, I read a piece from Audre Lorde, and the first line, she opens up this speech with, "I am woman, mother, warrior, lesbian, Black poet, coming to do my work, asking if you are doing yours." And that was one of the first times it dawned on me that I get to show up in every space, whole and unapologetic. And nobody else outside of me gets to tell me otherwise. And I've got a lot of work to do internally, and that I can't do any work on behalf of a collective if I'm not continuously doing my own internal work. And it's hard. No one wants to look in the mirror and point at all the things that you need to improve, especially as a leader. It can be a painful part of your process, but it's an absolutely necessary part of the process. And so what I've noticed as a trend nationwide, and it alarms me, it terrifies me and it breaks my heart, as we push for Asian American studies and history and curriculum in schools. What's happening, or what I've seen, is we're doing it at a disservice to Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders who have always felt othered and excluded in API spaces. But even worse, we do it at the expense of all communities of color. And that's especially painful given the history of ethnic studies over the last 50 years. Ethnic studies, every child, every single child, and every study supports it. Every child needs access to high quality ethnic studies, to culturally responsive classrooms and spaces that center who they are at their core, all of their humanity, and provides windows and mirrors and sliding doors into other communities of color. Our history is full of stories of solidarity. And I think that we often forget, especially when folks are making decisions, in particular about education, who have zero classroom experience. Please stop. Teachers are not happy about that. It shows, like it really, really shows. When kids are in spaces that, and teaching over the last few years in this pandemic, there were days kids would come to my class and do zero, absolutely nothing for a 2-hour block. But they would look up and go, but miss, I felt safe today, so I'm gonna take it as a win. I taught theater and I taught English, but I taught through an ethnic studies lens. One of my absolute favorite plays to teach was Zoot Suit. Zoot Suit by Luis Valdez, creator of Teatro Campesino, an artist during the Delano strikes alongside Larry Itliong and Dolores Huerta and Cesar Chavez. And every time I taught that play, I learned something new. But when I got to teach that play, it wasn't just about making sure students had historical context about the strikes in Delano or in the Central Valley. It was also helping them understand that it was about language access. It was about communities, first-gen immigrant communities, finding ways to communicate beyond language through the arts, through theater. It was Black Okies who had already settled after the Dust Bowl in the area. It was Filipino migrant workers. It was Central American and Chicano migrant workers. And then in the text itself, in Zoot Suit, I could spend a month teaching just the prologue, because the choices Valdez makes in that first scene, it opens with Duke Ellington's Perdido, right? This Black jazz musician is opening this Chicano story in East LA in a Spanish song, while this opening dance number centers Black, Japanese, Jewish, and Chicano folks from East LA. And it is a beautiful, beautiful vision of solidarity in action. And the kids, like, just even when we get into the history of the Pachuco, the history of the Zoot Suit, from Black jazz musicians like Cab Calloway to Chicanos migrating to East LA and settling in Boyle Heights, it's an absolute celebration of the joy that we share between our communities. And that is what ethnic studies offers across all content areas. It is interdisciplinary, it is intersectional. Shout out to Kimberly Crenshaw. It is intersectional. That means that we are getting to show up in those classrooms, those young folks show up in classrooms as their whole selves all the time, unapologetically. And they do so in community and as a collective. My last unit of the year was always a collective piece, a verbatim piece, where students would spend maybe 2 months interviewing community on issues they felt were close to their heart or most impactful on their community. And they would interview everyone, neighborhood, folks at school, family members, and then they would take those pieces and string them together after we had learned about folks like Anna DeVere Smith. And then other teachers would ask, how do you get a classroom of 40, 50 high schoolers to write a single play as if they are one voice? And the first time I got that question, I was like, wow, don't ask me, I don't know. It just happened that way. But the more I thought about it, and I actually did research my last few years in the classroom doing study groups with young folks I had taught theater to over 4 years at a time, and they made it clear. They were like, well, miss, we come to class every day, we're safe, we get to be our whole selves, we are aware of what's going on in the world, and even though it's sad and depressing and we feel hopeless and like there may not be a way to solve the issue, we at the very least have each other and we can create a piece together to work through those emotions, to practice what action would look like in our community through theater, through the arts. And so I share that story just to say that it's absolutely possible. Like Grace Lee Boggs has said, we have to reimagine everything, all of it. EPIC's vision is liberation for all. And our tag says we are a pro-Black, pro-Indigenous organization. Yes, we advocate on behalf of Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders through advocacy and research, leadership development, and our narrative work, but we cannot do that work at the expense of any other community. It can't happen that way. And so this ongoing fight for Asian American histories, it boggles my mind that we can pass a law for Asian American API histories. I don't want to call it ethnic studies, because it's not. I promise you it's not ethnic studies. But we can't pass a law like that in a state that also just banned AP African American curriculum. It does not make sense, right? We cannot be for one and not for the other.
Right,
It
exactly.
does not make sense that books are being banned to the extent they're being banned, but we're, Asian American history. But what book? With what book? They're banned. Like, what, how are you? Does not compute. So, I'll leave there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There's a lot, right? There's a lot. This is not a roadmap conversation of like, this is where we need to be and this is how we're going to get there. But we do have to be comfortable stepping into that complexity and having a deeper analysis so that we can build together. This last question that is open for all of you, and I would love to just encourage more conversation amongst the panelists too around, so given this, we've talked a bit about having a vision to build towards. What should that vision be? What's the one thing, maybe there's more than one thing, but what's the one thing we can do or shift individually or collectively to advance this vision of liberation, of racial justice, what's the one thing? Do folks need to think about it, or I'm going to just call on people? You had the question, but
I've got two. I'm
okay,
going to say.
we'll start with you.
I'm going to say you've got to do your work, your personal work, because if you don't do your personal work, the internal, then you actually can't be in the habit of centering the most marginalized, which is what we have to do. And so looking at the data earlier, right, it's very clear who is the most marginalized in API communities, right? And so that means that when we are having summits and convenings, we're thinking very critically and consciously about Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders, who are often not in the space, who are othered, who are left out, who are brought in after the fact, who are often tokenized and asked to speak on a panel super last minute, right? Who are asked to travel across the country, but no resources to help you travel, but we do need you to labor on our behalf, right? I'm just putting that out there. That is very common in my new role, is that we are funding ourselves to go be the token on a panel last minute. Super common for our organizations. And so you have to do the personal so that we're in the habit of regularly centering the most marginalized. And what that looks like for Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders, that means we're thinking also very critically about the way we center Melanesians in our community, who again, anti-Blackness is worldwide. It's in the Pacific and it's everywhere else, but we've also got to remember, to a point made earlier, it's also not a part of our ancestry and our lineage and who we come from, right? And so we can uproot it and dismantle those systems and structures of white supremacy by doing the personal to make sure we are not aligning ourselves with whiteness, with power, or at least we're understanding power and privilege and our proximity to it.
Who wants to go next?
I guess I can
Pam.
go. For me, it's a vision. I don't have like a vision. I have things in terms of a pathway together that we would be able to create that vision together, right? And for me, that vision, we talked about liberation. What was it? Liberatory? What was the word?
Liberatory leadership.
Liberatory leadership. I think back in our day we called it self-determination, but maybe it's the same thing. But it's like, being able to give voice and honored self-determination in creating that path together. I feel that that vision also, looking back at the topic that you discussed last year in terms of the moments that we were at and the needs and the anti-Asian and hatred and the resources and the coming together of being able to have a vision in which when there's a crisis, there's the response. Somebody used the word crisis response. That vision and it really incorporates being able to uplift and heal, and then create together a vision of safety, a vision that where we also look at. Right now, I feel, like Vivian said, climate affects everything. And everybody and everything and every living species. And that right now, to be able to move forward, for us to understand what that means. And I just want to raise in terms of, for example, for us Asians, food security is really important. And with climate right now and the droughts that are existing, the production of rice in Asia is going to go down 30%. And the costs of the food and access to healthy food, and in the droughts in Texas, where I know we buy our long grain, right? That drought is a real thing. And so we as humans created this moment, not us personally, but in terms of our need to extract into consumption, for consumption. That whole thing is, I think, the Buddhists talk about suffering, and we suffer from the desire to consume. And I just really feel that we to revisit these and is a part of our vision for the future. And finally, internationalism. For me, from our homelands to our front lines here, we're really interconnected, and to be able to be in solidarity. And for some of my work with the Filipino community and what is going on in the Philippines has impact on our frontline domestic workers here, and the care and attention they need to give to what's going on at home. And so when we look at economic situation for domestic workers, for example, it's not only that meager funds to feed their own family and provide housing, but also to send money to their families overseas. So I want that to stop. And finally, of course, abolishing environmental racism. And people can look that one up. That's your homework.
That's a big thing. That's not a small thing, but yeah. No, I think that's great. I think that's so. What I'm hearing from you, Pam, is building that vision together, right?
Yes.
So participating in that process of building the vision together and
Yes.
having a global view too
Yes.
of these forces.
Yes.
Peggy.
Yeah, I think that what's really important is that we have to be able to breathe in the moment that we're in, that in a different way, that we're multi-generational, and yes, there are some of us that have been around for a while and all that, but that privilege, I think it needs to get applied to all of where each of us sit. And there are a lot of leaders. Everyone in this room actually is a leader, and in many different ways. And so if we can't unpack right now during this moment for our country and around the world, the need for the intensity of which we need to look at ourselves to say, what have we built? Looking back, what have we tried to build? What's happening now? The need for disaggregated data. I mean, that's a starting place. We keep talking about it. We keep talking about these things. How are we building that into our practice? So it defines how resources are allocated, our government, and enormous wealth that exists in all of our communities now. They're there everywhere. And I don't mean just in our communities, but across the board. And what are we doing with all of that, right? To be able to unpack power, to unpack, influence, to be able to unpack decision-making, and apply it to the different spaces and the different formations that we've tried to build and are continuing to be engaged in. That's our accountability to each other. We want a better country, we got to build it and fight for it. If you want to live in a democracy, you got to fight for it every single day, because it doesn't just happen.
Right.
And I think that we live in the most complex ecosystem. But right now, there's so many things, and they're big. But however, small and large, ways in which we can participate. When we can't do it, maybe in the places that we work, then do it outside and join another formation, but get out there and do it. We all need jobs. We need, money. We need to, support our families and all of that. But the contradictions that are there for all of us, but the real, evil that's existing right now, here and around the world, if we can't do it, we've really lost it, and so I'm trying to live in a space of being a movement elder, like some of you too, right, Helen? But anyway, so and live in this moment and be our best selves. And we've got to be inspired by the work that we've been all involved in, or we know about and we care about. We got to lift ourselves up and be inspired by that. But we got to push ourselves to be able to keep fighting for what we know is so important. That's the most important thing. That's why your leadership right now, Carolyn, and within the context of why we're here today, it's critical. It's really critical. The kind of shifts. We've got to be able to really criticize more openly each other, and the crap that we know has not worked. Don't keep doing that. Don't keep doing it, and really help each other. Do the solidarity work where we're really building formations together, more networks, more partnerships, more everything. And I just think there's more of us everywhere now. But in every issue we unpack, look at the hate work. We're shooters and we're victims. What we've learned in the women's movement, it doesn't matter if we really fight for and build more DV or shelters, because some of us will still be pushed off of train platforms and killed, and that's blatant racism. That's who we are. That's the space we occupy. When we think about who we are, that's who we are. But if we want this country, our country, to be what we want it to be, what it still can be, then we got to fight for it. Yeah.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah.
What Peggy was saying in terms of relationships and building relationships. One of the things that I always talk to young people, and this whole thing around intergenerational. So when an elder says, "Oh, come on over for dinner," I say, "You go."
You heard it here.
Don't say, "Oh, I'm sorry, it's okay. I'm okay." No. Relationships.
Yep.
At the dinner table, at walks, giving a call to each other. Like this morning, somebody came to my mind. Oh, okay, that's why I'm late. I had to call somebody, because you got to check in. And it's building relationship from a place of their heart, but it also builds trust. So a lot of the projects that we want to do is be able to fund that general infrastructure for the work to get done, and don't give it a 2-year timeline. It does not happen that way. But being able to fund projects in which groups can work together and develop trust with each other and have dinner with each other. When we met with the mission, and then we went over and we were in the mission, and then we talked about, how did you get your name? your name is so special. How did you get your name? What kind of food is this? And we walked, and when they came to Chinatown, we went to the stores, bought the ingredients together, and cooked together. So different things in which you're building trust and friendships, and follow up and be each other's cheerleader.
Yeah, yeah. Kind of reminds me of what Vivian said earlier of, we belong to each other, right?
Right.
Leafa, I want to come to you too. What do you think? What's the one thing that we should be doing?
I was thinking of my people because there are, in listening, I also remember a saying in my culture about rolling out the mat and having a conversation.
Yeah.
And in this conversation, there is respect, there is love, there is also anger.
Yeah.
Issues come up,
Yeah.
but the mat is rolled out,
Yes.
and that means you're all welcome
Yeah.
to share. I get emotional when I talk about my people because when you're talking about all the other ethnicities that are in the room, then I think of the degrees of sophistication and understanding of a people. My people, sometimes I feel that somebody just picked us up from the islands and put out here, and we do our best to live just like as if we were in the islands. And so the big need for that is we need to learn on how to live in this country, how to be part of this country, and we cannot be just little pockets of Tonga in places. The degree of education is not the same. So the issues that are common to majority of us here is not common to us. Because we're insulated, because we're so adamant about being little Tongans in the United States. We dress like Tongans, we speak Tongan, we have Tongan big, huge feasts. For those of you who have never seen that, please come. And it is so big, and you spend so much money, and you wonder how many piglets can one eat.
Yeah.
But because the table will have piglets from one end to the other. And I'm sitting there and I'm calculating how much money was spent on this table. How many lobsters do you have climbing over piglets? But for us, that is being Tongan.
Yes.
And it's not, maybe we didn't do it as elaborately at home because we didn't have the money, but now we have the money, why not do it? Why not flood the tables with all the foods that we would have liked, but we didn't have? So it's very, to me, and all the years I've spent with them. And I want also to tell you how I became an elderly person. I go to church, I come out, there's a group of people, and they're talking about this Fine'eki. Fine'eki means a elderly, very elderly woman. And I would go by, and the conversation will drop. And then I'll come back the next Sunday, same thing. So I finally got so curious. I said, who's this elderly person you're talking about? Nobody answered. Everybody tried to look away from me. And I said, no, I want to know. I thought maybe there was a new elderly woman that's in my church. And then one of them looked at me and said, we're talking about you. I'm not elderly. But he said, you are the most elderly. But as for my people, I mean, we have an American education.
Yeah.
But for us, it's separated.
Yeah.
You're American, okay, and we'll tell you, okay, you're smart in the other way, but this is the Tongan way. And so that's a challenge in trying to teach them how to use their money. They will get 3 jobs, and then we'll have a fundraiser from somewhere, and you see them throw all that money right there, right now, because that's Tongan. So in some of the issues, some of the things that made us strong also makes us weak. And so that's my predicament with my people. I will be 79 in August. And I lead a group of national women, and we raise funds, we educate people, we do all kinds of stuff. But I also have an organization that also tries and teach health, mental health especially. And I have tried unsuccessfully for a number of years to get somebody to be trained. And they all refused to. They said, no, why? You're still living, you're still breathing. I said, not for long. And so it goes on, and they still refuse. And I don't know what's going to happen. I don't think I'll die peacefully because I'll have no idea who's trying to be boss. But those are Tongan issues. When we give, never mind your rent is due, never mind your car payment is due. If we're giving, we give all. And it's some of, and maybe those were good things, but it's not wise things to do. And who am I, as old as I think I am, or they think I am, to come and tell them, teach them how to live within their means. As far as the prejudice, it's something, it's a rude awakening, because we're so used to being us, being Tongan, that we are not aware that this happens right under our noses. And I was sharing with him, my first introduction to that was, I took a friend to go shopping at the market, and she wanted me to pick her up. And I came, and I slowly drove through trying to see whether she was coming out. And then this van came, and they had like 3, and I hate to say this, white people. And they were upset because I didn't go, but I was going slowly to look for this woman. And there's a big buffet place right next to the market. And then they got mad at insulting me because I wasn't paying attention. I was paying attention looking for my friend. And then the last call was, go to the buffet, that's where you belong. And I said, was that prejudice? It's never been done. It's never been directed at me. And I come home, and I went home, and I was so unsettled because is that what they think of us? They equate us to food, but that was my experience, and that's when I knew that prejudice is very much alive. And it may have been just something simple, but it struck a chord, and I said, so this is what people are talking about. And as far as this work, I don't know why people make it so complicated and so difficult to apply for a grant.
There's funders in this room. There's funders in this room.
I'm not trying to get my PhD in grant writing. I just want you to please give me some money.
But you probably do have a PhD in grant writing. But
This is the conversation. This is the main when you
this
said
is the hard stuff, y'all.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Here we go.
And I said, sometimes that they're trying to pacify us. I'm talking about us, the little groups. They'll fund you, and they'll give you not enough money to do anything, and sometimes enough money for a year. Do they know how difficult it is to start again?
That's right.
You lose your credibility. You come back again and said, you said you were going to do this, and then it stopped. What happened? I said, there was no more money. Then why are you doing it? It's a stop-and-go thing that helps nobody. So if anybody out there is listening, please understand, we appreciate the help, but help us enough to be able to move somewhere.
That's right. That's right.
I'm gonna take moderator rights and say we were gonna have some time for Q&A, but I want to make sure that Nikki and Vivian also get a chance to chime in. These lovely ladies will be here, so you can Q&A them individually afterwards.
Yes.
Nikki, Vivian, what's the one thing or one shift you think we need to do?
Do you want to go first, or?
Sure. I think piggybacking on Leafa, I would say if you're a funder, if you're a leader of an organization, you have some agency to make some change here, make small matter, make small communities matter, make small populations matter. We know this as the API community because in here in the Bay Area, we might be 30-something%, but in the nation, we are 5%. We are very small, but when we have power here, we have some agency, right? So as we have agency, I'll offer an analogy. My family's from the Mekong Delta. We often have analogies in our sector about like roads and highways for some reason, so I'm going to offer a nature analogy. All the streams, all the water flowing down, it might be a big stream in a river form, doesn't reach the ocean in a huge river form. Right. It actually relies on these smaller threads to get to the ocean finally. And so the big stream is following these little threads. You have to invest in, you have to see Southeast Asians, South Asians, Pacific Islanders, Native Hawaiians. So many more layers of us are underneath of those big descriptions of us. Right. And that's how we're going to get to it. So we're going to practice solidarity, practice it within our own continent right now. And I'll also name that if you are a funder, if you are a leader in your organization, to get to relationship building, to get to a dinner together, to get to spend time with youth and more generations, we have to actually not make it so hard on our workers who are the liaisons to those communities to be part of their community realistically. We have to offer realistic work hours. We have to offer pay that's livable wages that where they could support their retirement and their children, right? And sometimes, you know this, we support other family members too. Many of you might be the first generation who is making this type of money, but like still nonprofit money. So we got to, as funders and as leaders in an organization, think about liberatory operations too.
Oh, yes.
So that this community building that is so innate in our communities exists in this community building that we're doing as well.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you, Nikki. Vivian gets the last word.
Yeah, I mean, I think the piece I'm really sitting with is, we always talk about how in organizing is just about relationships, right? And that organizing requires relationships, right? And so I'm just really sitting with this idea that I think that's been expressed, amongst all the speakers about how, if we really have a relationship with those who are most impacted and really centering their leadership, how our solutions would be so much more intersectional, would be so much more complex, would be so much more visionary, Yeah, because I think that when I think about our members, there was a conversation about the Green New Deal, in a statewide coalition a few years ago, and I remember people really surprised, oh, you're talking about healthcare for all as part of the Green New Deal, and I was like, yeah, that's what our members want. Right? It's not just climate is not just a conversation about carbons in the air, right? But it's about really how do we put forward a vision for what's regenerative for our society and our economy as a whole, right? And so there's a way in really centering that relationship in the agency and the self-determination of people and driving the solutions. We're actually going to get a much better set of solutions and a much more visionary world. And then I think that in addition to thinking about relationships, I'm also thinking about the relationship on an individual and a community level that we can have with each other. So at APEN, we actually organize community members that are of different ethnic communities. And we have found even within our own membership, how little our community members know of each other's communities, right? And so, so just even bring our Chinese immigrant members together with our Laotian refugee members and really even be able to share about their stories of immigration, their stories of, what it was like to be a refugee, how powerful that's been to build greater understanding and solidarity, right? Because I think that there's a level of solidarity and then there's a deeper level of solidarity, right? And that's where I think the relationship piece feels so important. And then the last thing I was going to lift up around the relationship piece is that, we've also been holding these healing circle spaces with our members, and actually doing it in partnership with APSC, Asian Prisoner Support Committee. I don't know if folks are here from there, but just want to lift them up, shout them out. But just how part of the solidarity within is also about really having a deeper understanding of different of our different lived experiences, right? And really being able to kind of deepen into understanding kind of the fullness of like what are the conditions, you know, that our communities are experiencing, right? And then how in that work, I think what's been so transformative is, again, it's the relationship of really learning about, you know, others and their lived experiences. But in that process, also, I think deepening the relationship to yourself, right? And so this is really building, I think, on what Estella was talking about, right? How important it is for us to also be healing ourselves in this process. Yeah, so I would end with that. Just organizing is about relationships.
So many threads,
that's a
right?
great
I think, so just, I don't know that I can summarize, but I'll try in terms of really doing the internal work. And you're going to hear a little bit more about that this afternoon as well, the internal work that we need to do in order to work cross-racially. There's a lot of internal work that we need to do within the Asian American community, with your own identity, within the Pacific Islander community, and then together, right? Really going deeper with relationships. So if Pam calls you for dinner, you don't say no. You do not say no. But this idea, but that goes back to, I think, a point Vivian made earlier around knowing where you come from, knowing all the moments that led up to where you got to where you are. Because the only way that we're going to learn that, now that we're really charged up in this movement, is by learning it from folks who came before us, right? And so that's also why I wanted to start with this, is there's such a rich history in the work that's been done in our community. And while we have this moment of so much energy and so much momentum, we have to track back to where we've been and where we need to go, going deeper in solidarity, forming these relationships, understanding, I love that, Nikki, around the big streams and the small streams. And Leafa's point around perception of our own communities as well, right? And the perceptions that we have within and across, and how some of that discrimination is impacting us. Part of today is also about recognizing when we're being discriminated against. Sometimes it's very subtle, right? And where are those otherings happening, and how do we recognize and shift those moments as well? I just want to thank these amazing women for this conversation. Please join me in thanking them.
It's so fun to be doing it with you.
Thank you for partnering with us on this conversation, for your belief in having the conversation, and for sharing your insights. This has been an incredible way to start.